What's up, everybody, and welcome to a brand new episode of the 5280 Podcast right here on the MHRT Network. I am your host, Mundungus Greavy, alongside, for the most part, Cameron Parker, P.O., Gage Madrid NFL, and Glenn Hauser. What's going on, guys?
What's up?
Yo.
Cam, let's see the fashion show. Let's start with the fashion show tonight.
It's got the jersey with Sertan.
That's clean, man.
Yeah. The Vapor Fuse is what I went with. The Vapor Fuse. The one thing I will say about the jerseys is I like the fact that for people that had doubts about it, they see it in person. Sometimes they see it on the on the player. They see it on the player. They see it on the person, and so they then they just have a tendency to just be like, oh, you know what? I really like the feel of the jersey a little bit better.
And I have to show off my, I believe, shirt courtesy of Mr. Mario Vitanzi. So thank you, Mario.
Shirt idea though. we'll save that one for later. That'll be good. But to start some things off with, we have Mr. Hauser, who's got some things to get off his chest about a certain player that is skipped the second voluntary workout or voluntary something for the Broncos, and we're of course talking about Courtland Sutton. So Glenn, the floor is yours, good sir.
And I don't think I'm alone on this stance, and we've talked about it a little bit in some previous episodes, but before anyone needs to give me the definition of voluntary, I know what that means. But Courtland Sutton not showing up to gel with a brand new quarterback because he's trying to get a new deal is really not captain-like. It's very unbecoming as far as somebody that is trying to say, I deserve a new contract, but really isn't showing that he's very dedicated to this team. I say we got to ship him out. We need people on board. You know, it's I was looking up, and Mike Kliss had a great article. You know, just to give an idea, he currently ranks number 25 in receiver pay for 2024. But listen, he's still making an 8-figure salary and has only had 1,000-yard receiving seasons in his entire career. You know, just to give you an idea, as far as his statistics last year, even though he had 10 touchdowns, which, you know, we've had some fullbacks. John Kuhn is from Green Bay, I think, had a whole slew of touchdowns, but we're not, you know, renegotiating his contract. He tied for 57th in the NFL with 59 catches and 44th with 772 yards. I mean, that in a 17-game season is just horrendously bad. I mean, that's 3.5 catches per game for a number one receiver, and he's not showing up. Like, I think he would stand a better chance of getting a renegotiated deal or a different contract that maybe had a little bit more than the $2 million guaranteed this year if he bothered to show up and show that he wanted to make things happen with this new quarterback that we have. I think it's a huge mistake and really just points to him wanting to be out of here.
Yeah.
So I have one question before we get into anything. At this point, with Courtland Sutton from the beginning to Courtland Sutton now, has he proven he can be a number one wide receiver at this point?
That's, I think, the one thing that's maybe an argument for it. But, you know, but by the same token, his statistics, and, you know, Glenn, you know, provided that his statistics and the way that it's been proven is he's not been a wide receiver one. Maybe on certain teams he can be a wide receiver one, or maybe even here he can be that wide receiver one. But when he's been here, he's never proven to be the wide receiver one. I get the arguments that, you know, with Russell Wilson and everything, that he was his wide receiver one, and he was. But the statistics and everything, the way that he was playing and, you know, producing, it's not at wide receiver one level. The only thing you can probably make an argument for that was maybe wide receiver one level was the touchdowns. But that was, you know, that, I mean, but still, like, I just think that you're sending a very, very bad message. And even if Sean Payton never said your name, he indirectly mentioned your name when he throws out the 98% statement, saying that 98% of the people were showing up to the voluntary minicamp. Like, he doesn't have to say your name to kind of throw you under the bus, and he threw you under the bus by saying the 98% people were showing up. And we've mentioned this point even numerous times before, but Garrett Bowles showing up. Like, I mean, it needs to be said more often than not on there. It's just like Garrett Bowles showing up, who is a player, and it's been mentioned numerous times, who has voiced his concern and displeasure over restructures and everything like that with his current contract. And and they could easily move on from him, maybe more so than Courtland Sutton. He shows up to camp, right? He shows up to camp. So it's just a very unfortunate situation. Bo Nix and all these quarterbacks, they need Courtland Sutton there. He's not there. And I understand the idea that people work out on their own around this point in time. But with a new quarterback, and it's always been, to be fair, it's always seems like it's been a new quarterback, a revolving door. But still, I would much rather have chemistry with my players than actually, basically work out on my own.
Yep. And when it comes to Courtland Sutton, the production is not matching the level that he's getting paid. The dude is getting paid like the 25th, or he's the 25th receiver in terms of pay. Is that correct, Glenn? Is that what it said?
Yes.
Yeah.
But production is way, way down further.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you pair that with the fact that we're going to have a much different style of quarterback playing here in Denver in Bo Nix, somebody who gets the ball out in the quick game, on time, in rhythm, in structure. That's not really who Courtland Sutton's akin to playing quarterback with. He had that production with Russell Wilson mostly on scramble drills when Russell Wilson would bail, and he'd heave one up to Courtland, and then the red zone as well. Courtland Sutton can't thrive as a number one receiver just being relegated to that niche role. He has to have more clubs in his golf bag. He has to be able to utilize a lot more in the route tree. He has to just be able to be a dynamic threat in any facet of the field, the short area of the field, the intermediate area of the field, and the deep area of the field. If that's not going to happen, then you can't be a number one receiver in the NFL. I understand the man wants more money. He's only got a year or two left before he's on the wrong side of 30, and he's probably only got one more contract left in his future. But that doesn't mean that he shouldn't at least be here in the building, holding in rather than holding out, working out on your own down in Florida. The last time we saw a holdout extend into the regular season that I can remember was Melvin Gordon in 2019 with the Chargers. That didn't fare well for him. He lost out on millions of dollars because of that. Comes to Denver on a 2-year deal. Ultimately, gets another 1-year deal and then gets cut halfway through that season because he fumbled the bag, both figuratively and literally. Courtland Sutton is going to probably extend this holdout until we get to mandatory minicamp in June. That's when significant financial penalties are going to be at play. So that's when stuff is going to really get real. I don't think that we're going to see any movement with Courtland Sutton and him return to the building until June when mandatory minicamp starts.
And I know that we saw his jersey hanging in the team pro shop when they were showing the new jerseys, on display. But the fact that he was not part of any of those jersey reveals speaks volumes to me. If he ends up staying with the team this year, I would be shocked if he had a captain's patch on his chest, because he's not shown anything that tells me that he's worthy of being the captain again for this team.
Yeah, and again, we're not in those rooms every day. We're not in, we're not at all. Like, we're not in those rooms. I mean, like, and the thing is like,
neither is he.
Yeah,
No, just-
but I just think that the only, and I'm, maybe to play devil's advocate, is the way that, like, unless there was some conversation beforehand, right? Like, like if there's some conversation beforehand that was saying, I'm not going to be able to, attend these voluntary workouts. I'll work out on my own. I will be there for mandatory, unless there was like some prior actual conversation that happened, then okay, I can at least understand that. And the other side of it too with Courtland Sutton is the social media posts. Look, the social media posts, the stuff with Instagram, his post even a while back on X and or even Twitter, where he said, I want to be a part of a program or a team that I feel wanted. Like, I mean, like, that kind of crap lingers for this fan base and everything. And so not showing up, in particular for the young quarterback, and then of course the comments and stuff that's been leaked out, like the emoji signs and stuff, like with Jerry Jeudy and even Tim Patrick, like, it's not a great look for a guy that has that C on his chest. And again, maybe we're reading too much into it. I know that Mike Kliss has been on our show and even the Let's Talk Broncos podcast and mentioned that he doesn't feel like Courtland Sutton is moving. But we know that it's a very fluid situation. And so things can certainly change on a dime. And, maybe we're not looking at it from the standpoint of Courtland Sutton may not be traded, yes, but he could be cut.
Well, we just had this issue with Jerry Jeudy and the social media posts and the attitude. But if you...
And the underproduction.
Right, but at least from my point of view, like, Jerry Jeudy makes more sense with Bo Nix than Courtland Sutton does. So for me, it's like, Gage was saying it before we even went live, like, he's okay with the youth movement at wide receiver. Mm-hmm. So am I. Like, Marvin Mims, you got Troy Franklin, you got Blay, and then you have Tim Patrick as a salty veteran. Like, I'm cool.
Josh Reynolds.
Josh Reynolds or John, if you're drunk and don't know what you're doing on a draft stream, but
I think that it's going to all depend on if Josh Reynolds and Tim Patrick can step up. Tim Patrick gets the health questions. Josh Reynolds, I don't think there are a whole lot of question marks. If anything, you can maybe question his hands because of his drop issues that he had in the playoffs. But if you look at his regular season, I don't think that was an issue for him. I think that this playoff bugaboo of drops was kind of an outlier. So if those two receivers can step up, then I'm all for moving off of Courtland Sutton. But again, I just don't see a scenario where they trade him. It would have already happened by now. Mm-hmm. The team has made it clear they do not want to trade him. They want him.
They want him there.
We don't. Yeah, and again, we don't know the language and the conversations that are going on behind closed doors between Courtland Sutton and the Broncos brass. But if those conversations continue to go south, then maybe Denver might have to pivot directions. I just don't think they want to get there unless there's just no reconciling the situation and they have to move him. That is the only scenario where I feel like they will move him.
So this is my question, if we know what the answer is. Is he holding out for a new contract or for more guaranteed money? Because he's out of guaranteed money at this point.
I mean, the answer is all centered around money. I mean, it's all centered around money. And so whether that is...
But is this like a new contract or a restructure where he gets guaranteed money over these next 2 or 3 years?
I would imagine with it being guaranteed, you're still looking at a new contract, because the moment they rework the guarantee, you're also talking about a new deal. And so it makes sense to not just give a contract and just solely have it be, worked around guarantees. You might as well rework a contract as well. And so maybe that's been something that has been said, is that given Jerry Jeudy's contract that was received by the Browns, I can understand the frustration from that side of it, that, like, oh, Jeudy got paid and I did in fact produce a little bit better than him. So, maybe I do need, maybe a much more, wealthier type of contract. Recently got married. Maybe I do need a little bit more of a richer contract. But again, at the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding from what we're seeing off of, just on the exterior side of things. And it is not a great look from a captain.
So going from that,
Absolute booty cheeks.
there's always just one comment that just you can't ignore it. Okay, so going from Courtland Sutton to rookie minicamp, I would love to get your guys' perspective on Gage. I know you did a bunch of videos on Bronco Syndicate about breaking down minicamp and Bo Nix and Troy Franklin and all those guys. I would love to get a breakdown or perspective of how you guys think minicamp went.
Yeah, so I think that Bo Nix met or exceeded expectations. He operated really, really well at the line of scrimmage from what all reports indicate based on individuals that I've talked to who were there, as well as the reports that are just already out there. He did really, really well handling the pre-snap cadence. He did really, really well handling just all the mental stuff that you need to handle at the line of scrimmage. He was able to deliver the ball accurately, on time, in rhythm. He was able to showcase the ability to spread the ball around, and arm strength was not a concern whatsoever for him. He was able to thread the ball into some tight NFL windows deep down the field. So that's very, very encouraging. There's no pass rush, and he was throwing to several receivers who were there on a tryout basis who didn't even make it out of that camp. Mm-hmm. So do with that information what you will, but Bo Nix passed the initial eye test, and Andrew Mason, who is probably one of the more conservative Broncos analysts out there in terms of projecting something, he couldn't help but contain a grin after seeing that practice for the first time. I think Mace showing legitimate excitement there is a very big clue that things might be looking different at the quarterback position here in Denver. Other players who stood out, Troy Franklin, the chemistry with Bo Nix and Troy Franklin was really on display. Apparently, I can't really talk about some of the stuff I know about, like the routes that they connected on and stuff like that, but let's just put it this way. The chemistry was there. They were able to put that on display multiple times. Also, Devon Vele, he had a sensational camp, was catching everything thrown his direction, stood out, made multiple big plays. Sean Payton talked about him in his post-practice press conference after day 2, and he said that you see a lot of similarities with Tim Patrick, somebody that you can play in a physical inside the numbers role as almost like a bigger slot receiver. Devon Vele, in the event that Tim Patrick goes down or maybe has to step in for that Courtland Sutton role, we could maybe see Devon Vele be utilized in that big slot role, in that Tim Patrick role. And other guys who really, really stood out, Blake Watson, the undrafted free agent running back. Sean Payton said he wants to throw that guy a lot of passes. I think Blake Watson could make the roster. I talked about this in a Broncos Syndicate video. We had talked previously about maybe Jaleel McLaughlin being on notice because of Blake Watson. I think it could be somebody else. I think it could be Samaje Perine. Perine was our primary receiving back last year. Yes, he is more akin to a third down role just because of his ability to pass protect. Blake Watson with his smaller frame, not so much. But when you compare their receiving stats from last year, Blake Watson and Samaje Perine were nearly identical. So in theory, if you can get a similar level of receiving production from those two players, then I'd much rather go with the younger, cheaper option in Blake Watson. For me, it's all going to be about pass protection. Mm-hmm. How do those two fare out in that competition? But I think there's a very realistic scenario where Perine's gone because the Broncos can save $3.5 million by moving on from him.
Yeah, I think that if you look at from the just even more feedback, I think the point that I think everyone was also gleaning to is to piggyback off the chemistry with Troy Franklin is it wasn't just Franklin. I mean, it was everybody else. And I think that those are baby steps. And, you don't want to read too much into rookie minicamp because it is simply that. It is rookie minicamp. But to those rookies, it means a great deal. Like, it means a great deal for them because it means that, maybe like this particular draft class is a foundational draft class for Sean Payton. That particular rookie minicamp is to build their foundation for going forward with the organization, and really start things off on the right foot. And so I think that, for me, it's kind of interesting. I think we were talking about Courtland Sutton a little bit, earlier. I think really the wide receiver that could trigger Sutton actually being off the roster is Devon Bailey, because I think that, depending on how he plays, and I know that he made the comparison, to Tim Patrick. I recently just posted on social media yesterday about maybe even Sean Payton is actually looking at it maybe a little bit wrong, and the comparison is actually Marcus Colston. For anybody that is that has a chance to maybe remember Marcus Colston was a draft pick of Sean Payton in his first year with Reggie Bush. 7th round draft pick 252 was Marcus Colston. Devon Bailey was a 7th round draft pick in Payton's second class. And he was picked 7th round of 235. So there's some similarities. The only thing that is a vast difference between Bailey and Colston is the weight. Colston came in, I want to say, was around 224 or something like that. Bailey is roughly about 203. That can obviously change. But the idea of a big slot receiver and someone that is a very reliable and also down the field threat, I think is a very fascinating and intriguing option. And I think that, given the trust early for guys like that, and given the fact he's a 7th round draft pick, could push a lot of people, and maybe some players on notice, and particularly Courtland Sutton.
Yeah, it was great hearing Peyton commenting about Bo Nix and his performance. He throws compliments around like manhole covers. So to hear that is a great thing. And, just the idea with the chemistry with Troy Franklin, it just validates making that trade to move up and grab him in the 4th round and really have, for lack of a better term, that security blanket from previous college seasons on the roster. So what kind of magic can they make for years to come? I'm very, very optimistic, and it seems I owe Bailey somewhat of an apology as I thought that was a weird pick in the 7th round and really was, hoping that they would go tight end in that position. But just Zach Stevens from DNVR on their pod, I believe it was yesterday or the day before. No, it was yesterday. He said that he could actually see Bailey being the team's number 3 receiver this year, and which I thought would be pretty spectacular. And that point also brings, do we need to be paying receivers $15, $18, $19 million these days when we can potentially discover a top 3 receiver in the 7th round, that's 26 years old.
Yeah.
It's, I like the reports that I was hearing out of Dove Valley from this past weekend, but like Gage said, it's very orchestrated. It's, take it for what it is, but it was not a disaster. We can all take stock in that.
Sean Payton called Bo Nix boring. But that's kind of what we want at this point, right?
Oh, boring. We can get that T-shirt going.
Yeah, I made a video about this actually today. About Bo Nix. Boring is not necessarily a bad thing. No. Let me tell you some other quarterbacks in the NFL who are boring. Tom Brady made a 20-plus year career out of being boring. Mark Schlereth, I was listening to the Stinkin' Truth podcast last night, talked to Byron Leftwich in Tom Brady's 2nd year in Tampa Bay. And he basically asked Byron, what separates Tom from all the other quarterbacks in the NFL? His answer was, if Tom's first read is open, a 4-yard flat route, 5-yard hitch route, whatever it is, he's going to take it 100 times out of 100. He's not going to pass it up to try to look for a flashy, bigger play. Now, third down, red zone, fourth quarter, there are certain exceptions to that rule, certainly. Then you compare that to somebody like Patrick Mahomes last year, where, for the most part, throw underneath when necessary, get out of the pocket, make those plays, throw back across the body, make all those crazy Mahomes throws that we've always seen. But those only would come third down, red zone, fourth quarter, when you need that play to be made. The number one quarterback at throwing underneath last year was Patrick Mahomes. He was boring last year.
Mhm.
All we need is a quarterback who can execute on time, in rhythm, in structure. I preach this in almost every single Bo Nix video that I make, because that is what Sean Payton needs for his offense to be successful. And that is how you win in the modern day NFL, with all of these too high Fangio shell coverages that are umbrellaing all of your deep shots over top. Everything underneath is going to be there. Flat routes, hitch routes, quick out routes. All of it is going to be there. You need somebody who can distribute underneath. And the quarterbacks who have had the most success, both historically and this past couple of seasons, do that. They take what the defense gives them.
Well, and Patrick Mahomes had to be boring last year because Kadarius Toney wasn't going to catch it.
Well, and if you're even looking at it from, previous situations, either with the Broncos or even current situations, I know Glenn is over, near the Patriots area, but if you get a chance to listen to, what Gerard Mayo said about Drake May, it wasn't positive at all. Like, it wasn't positive at all. The comments even coming out of, rookie minicamp. Now, let's jump back into the DeLorean to the Drew Lock years. Yeah, unfortunately, the Drew Lock years. Vic Fangio was not granted it was Fangio, but was not glowing. Was not glowing whatsoever of Locke when, coming out of rookie minicamp, or even, right around when they drafted him. I think he called him, he was a pitcher and we needed to turn him into a quarterback, right? And that's, and as things were starting to kind of flood in, that was not a very glowing comment from Fangio. And then you translate that to Sean Payton and with Nix talking about a golfer, like it pales in comparison to what we had, seen with Drew Lock and everything, because the other part of this, and it goes toe to toe with what Gage was saying, is that Nix understands situational football. That ties into playing in structure. So the ideas of him throwing that 4-yard pass because it's open, that's exactly what he would take, because that's the situation that it called. Third down and 5, third down and 10. You want to make sure you're throwing that ball past the sticks, or throwing it at least to a wide receiver that is open 2 yards, beneath the first down, so he can go out and get that first down, right? It shows it's understanding the situations and the offense that is certainly presented to you that you can go out and actually run. I mean, to be fair, that's one of the arguments that is against Mahomes, because people feel like Mahomes is of the system and not and not necessarily a quarterback that carries above all others, because they feel like Andy Reid truly controls that system. And you hear that so often about being a system quarterback. I don't feel that way necessarily coming out from Mahomes per se, but it's understanding those situations. It's understanding what is presented to you. And I think that Nick's already having that a little bit to his bag, or I should say his golf bag, right? Having that in his golf bag with a lot of different, clubs and irons to use, I think is going to be very useful for the Broncos. And the best way to explain it in Broncos quarterback terms, if you could blend Trevor Siemian and Drew Lock together for what they were able to do, I think you're talking about a pretty darn good quarterback, right? I mean, Trevor Siemian was a quarterback that would every once in a while and very frequently throw, beneath the sticks on situations where it really didn't call for it. Drew Lock would throw well past the sticks on situations that didn't really call for it. So if you could really, find the best way to blend both the ways of situational football, I think Bo Nix is going to fit right in with what Sean Payton wants.
And speaking of Drew Lock, I was going to say Drew
go
could be
ahead.
the quarterback he could be the starter for the Giants this year.
Good.
I mean, there's a real possibility that happens.
Yep. I want to actually go
luck.
back a little bit even further than Cam did, back to our last first-round quarterback, 2016 Paxton Lynch with Gary
Why,
Kubiak,
man? Why?
with Gary Kubiak making his comments.
Absolute
booty cheeks. It's because I see all these Twitter comments and YouTube comments about Bo Nix being the next Paxton Lynch, and we should pump the brakes on the hype because of Paxton Lynch. Here was Paxton Lynch after day one of his first rookie minicamp, according to Gary Kubiak. He's got a long way to go. His head is swimming. I think he'll catch up. He's a little inconsistent, and he had trouble calling plays in the huddle. That is not Bo Nix after what we heard from Sean Payton and after what was reported in the media. Bo Nix handled all of that stuff really, really well.
Yeah. Translation, this guy blows.
Yeah. I mean, that was basically Gary Kubiak sounding the alarm right there that this guy stinks, that this guy is going to be a problem to develop.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the final nail in the coffin for that was the final end of the year, a meaningless game. Right? A meaningless game. He easily could have rolled out Paxton Lynch in that game. No. I think I'll stick to my guns and I'll play the quarterback that I want to play, and that being Trevor Siemian.
Yeah. So,
speaking of Trevor Siemian, we should wish Lindsey Bebo a happy 30th birthday today.
Woo!
Happy birthday, Lindsey.
Friend of Broncos country.
Everything starts to hurt from here. Yeah.
They haven't done an episode in a bit, but go check out their podcast, The Crush Pod, with Shelby Manning and Lindsay. They do a fantastic work over there at that podcast. So make sure you go check out what they do over at The Crush Pod.
Yeah. So kind of sticking with the flow of horrible quarterbacks and why we have those horrible quarterbacks, such as Drew Lock and Paxton Lynch. There was some interesting information that started from a tweet from the account's called Jets Videos. And basically what they said was the Jets were trying to replace Nathaniel Hackett this offseason because basically they're leaning on Aaron Rodgers to correct all of Hackett's wrongdoings. Like when Hackett calls a horrible play and then Rodgers changes it at the line and then it ends up working, right? So then Nick Kendall came out and was kind of commenting on it and had brought up Nathaniel Hackett with Russell Wilson and just said that the pairing together just seems like the person that put those two together should still have a job. Well, then Benjamin Albright came back with, it was more than one person, but the he doesn't. And then there was a whole conversation about the general manager and who's making the calls and who's bringing in players. And there was an assumption that if it wasn't George Payton, then it was Joe Ellis. So I'm gonna read this tweet and we'll talk about it from there. So Nick Kendall said, "I assume you were saying Ellis was the one in charge of the Wilson Hackett moves." Benjamin Albright said, "Wrong, J.E." So there's only one other J.E. that I can think of.
Yeah,
and it's not Jonah Ellis. So the only one he could be talking about is John Elway, and we'll see later where that comes in, right? So basically, there was a head coach search committee, and two people on that committee made the very strong case based on his interview that it should be Nathaniel Hackett, despite the GM's gut feeling, which at the time was George Payton. It should be Dan Quinn or Jonathan Gannon, and the scouting director lobbying for Kevin O'Connell. Their case was bolstered by former GM J.E. promising he could deliver Aaron Rodgers at quarterback if they hired Nathaniel Hackett. They accelerated their hire of Nathaniel Hackett when the Jacksonville Jaguars flew out to Denver on a private plane, thinking they were after Nathaniel Hackett, who they'd interviewed. But really, the Jags were there to interview Fangio. Nathaniel Hackett was hired, and then Rodgers went back to Green Bay, despite assurances from former GM J.E., and the rest is history. So, basically, the Russell Wilson, Nathaniel Hackett, Aaron Rodgers drama was John Elway.
This is an amazing nugget. I mean, this is the Boulder chasing Indiana Jones. This is not a nugget. I mean, this is unbelievable, and I can't believe Ben has sat on this thing for years. This is incredible to me.
Yeah. Well, it actually, if you're going to talk about it in the current situation, a lot has been made about a certain someone in the front office and a certain relationship with Sean Payton. This kind of story actually might give credence to the idea that Sean Payton and George Payton actually are much better off together, and that Payton's hot seat that everybody has been speculating is actually maybe a little bit more cooler than maybe people think. That's just a layer to that. I mean, it certainly doesn't help matters that the head coach of Nathaniel Hackett is on that tenure for sure. But the fact that he didn't really want, Nathaniel Hackett, that's pretty interesting.
I didn't read that whole comment before I put it up. Okay, so he sat on it for years because it's fake news. And I'm assuming he means from this. Well, here's the thing and all that. John Elway did an interview, and he wanted the guy that got hired by Minnesota. So Kevin O'Connell, not Hackett. And at the end of the interview, he actually said he wouldn't have traded for Russell Wilson.
I would have loved to have seen that interview because I've never heard of that one.
Right. Well, and at the same time, like the Russell Wilson trade was done because we didn't get Aaron Rodgers, who was promised by John Elway that it would be in Denver. So either way, like I don't.
And you got to remember something. Who was it that initially leaked in the media that Aaron Rodgers coming to Denver was almost a sure thing? Mark Schlereth.
Yeah.
Who do you think Stink was talking to there?
Yeah, it makes you wonder.
Someone who used to. Did we mention Grundle again?
Oh, God. Oh, God.
That would be a pretty reliable source. And I mean, you just would love to know even some of the crazier details, like when it was determined Rodgers was going to stay at Green Bay after we had already hired Hackett. How was that news brought to ownership? How was that news brought back? And then, just what kind of scramble was going on after that that came to light that he wasn't coming. And quite honestly, like I'm glad he's not here. I'm glad he never came to begin with, based on just how he's been in recent years. The guy just continues to amaze. But it's this is an incredible way of thinking, way of changing how you're thinking perhaps about, like Cam said, with George Payton, and it just is very interesting too about how little power he had in the matter. That the two people on the committee, Kelly Klein and Ray Jackson, were the ones making the strong case for Hackett, and Payton wanted Quinn or Jonathan Gannon. So it just is pretty interesting that he didn't really have much of a say in the matter.
Well, and I mean, just kind of look at the history of what had happened when Elway was GM, right? Like, obviously we won the Super Bowl with Peyton Manning, but after that, like, look at the head coaching hires, look at the starting quarterbacks we had. Like, if you go back and you look at what happened after Peyton Manning, it kind of lines up with what Albright's talking about.
It does, and and it's. I'm going to go a little bit a step further. That's not Broncos related. It gives more credence to the fact that Joe Sakic is a much better executive than John Elway. I know that has been, thrown out every once in a while. But like Sakic is a much better GM than John Elway ever was. the way he's operated it, the way he's operating in the future. Elway, I mean, we're talking about a guy who is famous for not just him riding on a scooter downtown, but, maybe that same night being recorded and saying, "Good for you, bud." Like probably him, being inebriated at that moment, but saying, "Good for you, bud." And then you buddy up to a Ted Lasso type coach, which, I mean, there were some positives to a Ted Lasso type coach, but you also got a coach. And then you pile on with all the stuff that he was able to do in terms of, the moves of, you hate to say it, not just even the quarterback situation, but not even going out and solidifying your right tackle. I mean, there's a lot of cases to be made that, the quarterback position wasn't really solidified, but the right tackle may actually have been worse. Because if the right tackle position gets solidified, maybe a quarterback or two stays an extra year longer because of that right tackle being there. And then you factor in, of course, him just being solely focused on free agency and not so much the draft and developing talent. There's just so much to unpack there post Peyton Manning that it really makes you wonder how much control this guy really should have had. And again, this is a guy who was an owner of the Colorado Crush arena football team. Like, he had a business background. He already had a owning of a football team background. So what happened, behind the scenes, or what really just made him be egotistical to think that, this is my team now, if you will, as the years are winding down with Pat Bowlen.
Yeah, and Cam, I liked how you put it with George Payton. Like, we all thought that George Payton was going to be on the hot seat, boiling hot, because Sean Payton came in, but it might not have been as hot as we thought it was. It might not be hot at all. And another reason I bring that up is because you take this story and put it towards George Payton and that whole situation. And then you look at everybody that's been ripping on George Payton about his draft classes. And if you go back and you don't judge them by their rookie years, which you never should draft or grade a draft class based on their rookie season. But if you go back and you look at, and the Broncos put this out on their Twitter, Facebook, social medias, if you go back and you look at the 2021 draft, we had 10 draft picks, and it was regraded an A+ because of how many valuable starters we got out of that draft class.
Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, that was George Payton's first class. Like, that was George.
Was it?
Here,
yes.
I'll pull it up.
Yeah, because that was
yeah.
Surtain. That was Surtain, Javonte, Browning, Stearns,
Quinn Miners, Jonathan Cooper in the 7th round.
Mm-hmm.
Here, hold on, I'm pulling it up right now.
Caden Stearns, yeah, you said that.
Yeah, I mean they had a lot of people that were taken there, and we made the note that
Mike, can you add that? Yeah,
I got it.
Cool.
Yeah, we made the note as far as, like, in the past when Peyton was hired, that he was really good as far as identifying talent and identifying players, and you don't need to look no further truly than that particular class. Now, granted, there's that's probably going to maybe do some changing and stuff, maybe with Javonte Williams, depending on what happens with the running back position. But Surtain, obviously, the cornerstone player, right? Javonte Williams, maybe how they went about it is probably a bit of a sketchy situation in terms of trading up for a running back, right? But they really love Javonte Williams. And it's worth noting that George Payton loves drafting running backs high. If you go back and you look at his tenure with the Minnesota Vikings, the lowest they ever took a running back, I think, was the 4th or 5th round. So they do like spending high on running back. Then they go out and they get Baron Browning. Baron Browning and Quinn Miners were in a very rough territory of, where are they targeting? Who are they targeting? Because I think Jabril Cox was in that territory. do they want to go out and get an offensive lineman? Will they go out and select Quinn Miners? I think there's an argument to be made. Miners actually might be a franchise cornerstone player that's an offensive lineman, right next to Pat Surtain. And both are up for contracts in terms of being extended, which, by the way, sidebar, any dumb person that is on social media right now that actually feels like the Broncos do not have money, they have money, and they will pay Quinn Miners and Pat Surtain. Okay.
Wow.
So, and then
Kim's got heated there for a second.
Love it.
And then you go out into the questionable decision of taking back-to-back safeties of Caden Stearns and what was the other one? Jamar
Johnson.
Jamar Johnson, right. And a lot of people feel like Jamar Johnson was the safety that was the most pro-ready coming into this, like the most coming into the season, but yet Stearns was the highest ceiling. Coming to find out, Stearns was the one that really benefited the most coming into that because you had a room of Kareem Jackson, a younger Kareem Jackson, and Justin Simmons to really teach him how to play safety. And he really showed. He really showed it to be a capable safety despite all those injuries. Really, the only player that is just of major questions, in there is Seth Williams. Funny enough, played with Bo Nix. Seth Williams.
Jackson played with Bo Nix. He's so old.
Yeah. Kerry Vincent. Kerry Vincent, Marcus Spencer, and Seth Williams and Jamar Johnson are the only ones that are gone from that class. Every single person that is in that class are main contributors, for this Broncos roster. It's an amazing thing to look at, actually, when you look at that roster.
And Kerry Vincent was even a win because he was not going to make the team as a 7th-round pick. And I believe the Eagles gave us a 6th-round draft choice for him. So he was going to be dumped anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Great to see you, Mark. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you're talking starter, pretty much. And then maybe a starter, possible rotation, maybe a starter with Caden Stearns. So the first 5 picks alone, you're talking about that rarely happens in the class. And even when you look in terms of like the contributions of just that class alone, it's nice having, three contributors of a draft class to, being, on the field as far as that first year. They had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 contributors, within that draft. That's just absurd. It's really absurd.
And we were all stunned when Surtain's name was the one called. That was what a night.
Everybody thought it would be Fields, man.
Yeah.
I know that Big E likes to get on my nerves. So if you guys want to answer this one, you're more than welcome to or respond to it. I'm not angry, but he seems to like to poke the bear. So if you guys want to respond, you're more than welcome.
he's calling the Ben tweet fake news, and I would bet just about anything that is so detailed. There's nothing fake about that. That seems completely legit in my eyes.
Yep. And I wanted to go back. I looked up where that Kerry Vincent pick ended up, what we eventually got from that. Matt Henningsen, a really solid rotational player.
Nice.
So yeah,
a win.
Keep winning there, man.
Do we still have any John Elway draft picks on the team right now? Or was Simmons the last one? Sutton.
I
Bowles.
think
Is that it?
Bowles, yeah.
Right.
Sutton and Bowles.
I think that's it.
That's about it.
Are we that young of a team? Wow.
Well, Simmons would have been the other one, but he's not there.
Look.
I think that's it.
It's kind of interesting too. I went ahead and I pulled up the 2022 draft class, and it's not 6 contributors deep, but you have Dulcich, who finds himself into a situation still. You got to say what it is. You got to say what it is. He still finds himself in the territory of possibly being tight end 1 this year. They've not addressed tight end, so there's a window there for him to be tight end 1.
He's been hurt so much, he's almost like a rookie still.
Right. Nick Bonito, solid contributor. A lot of people compared him the Hassan Reddick coming out of college, right? Damari Mathis very likely appears maybe on the bubble right now. Awazarike, a lot of.
I would have been an Elway pick. That's why the team was so bad for 8 years.
They ride the scooters very similarly though, which is nice.
I squeal a little bit higher, but yeah.
The bearded blur.
Yeah, Awazarike, he's still on the roster. For people that are maybe kind of forgetting a little bit about him, Awazarike, he's still on the roster.
Are they bringing him back or no?
Is it a safe bet he comes back?
I think so, because the Lions, they cut.
I know he wasn't off the team, but are they officially activating him back to the team?
I've not heard anything in terms of what his status is, except for
he's not eligible to come back until July because it was a year-long suspension from the date that he got suspended. So he'll be back in July, but I think the fact that he wasn't cut immediately does speak volumes. You look at the Detroit Lions players outside of Jameson Williams who got caught gambling. They all got cut. Granted, CJ Moore, one of them was signed by Detroit, but almost all these other guys NFL front offices have cut. You have to imagine that the Broncos liked Uwazurike enough that they kept him around.
And I forgot about him and until Peyton referenced him the other day, actually. It was like, whoa, okay. I forgot. I forgot he could be a possibility. That would be pretty significant.
Yeah, we're talking about a 4th-round draft pick. Maybe people were sleeping on him a little bit coming in 2022. He's a very versatile player. He had 3 blocked field goals at Iowa State. Like, he's a very versatile defensive lineman. So maybe kind of follow that one. Obviously, Delaren Turner-Yell, I think it's safe to assume he's probably not going to be on the Week 1 roster. It will have to be an injury settlement because he's recovering from an ACL injury. Is probably how they're going to move on from him. But then Montreal Washington, he's gone, unfortunately, friend of the program. He's gone. But Luke Wattenberg, Matt Henningsen, those are 2 strong depth pieces for your offensive line and defensive line, right? So that's 1, 2, I'll just say Wazarike, 3, and you have 4 or 5. You have 5 at least pieces that are still a part of your roster, that are at least solid depth pieces. So that's still a decent. It's not on the level of 2021, but it's still a rather decent class, right? So, I think it's fun looking at those exercises. The one that irks me is when let's do a redraft. Let's do a redraft. It's what's the point of doing a redraft? It's not going to change any outcome of Pat Surtain going in the top 5 or Parsons going in the top 5. It's not going to change anything like that.
So let's go back to 2020, and I'm going to bring things to a screeching halt.
Oh, yeah. Okay, before we go back.
Okay.
Oh, this one's awful.
Before we go back, I will say, and obviously it's going to take a couple seasons to grade it, but I think that this draft class could also be 5-6 starters deep.
I think it can be.
Which is a huge statement because we don't have a lot of picks. I mean, some of these drafts that we're talking about, we had 10 picks. So to get 5 or 6 starters out of this one would be really spectacular. All right. So
this is the one I was waiting for.
Oh my gosh. We have 1 player still on the team from this draft out of 10. That's Justin Strnad. And in fact, he was this close to not being on the team because the Panthers had essentially gotten, from all reports, a commitment to go to Carolina, and he ended up circling back to Denver.
And by the way, Biggie Bronco, this was an Elway draft. Just pointing that out. Just throwing that out there.
Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, Ojemudia, Lloyd Cushenberry, Telvin Najim, Albert O, Batani Moody, Tyree Cleveland, and Derek Tuska. I mean,
roll the clip, Mike.
Cushenberry did hit, though.
Well, they did, but they're not here. And this was only 2020. I mean, These guys should all be in the 25, 26-year-old range, and they're not on the team anymore. I mean, it's just
that list really does
absolute booty cheeks.
And I think, and now you contrast this to when Sean Payton is here, and I like how you guys said about 2024 being a foundational piece. Like one of the things that all four of us have mentioned on the show before is how 2023 and 2024 are going to be foundational draft classes for this team. And funny enough, 2024 was low draft picks, right? Due to a certain trade that happened. 2023 was a very small draft class. And you actually look at there's possibly one player that actually might not be a starter or possibly even on the roster bubble and possibly even cut. All the other players actually could have significant roles for this team. Marvin Mims, Drew Sanders, Riley Moss, and your shoe-in. I will make that prediction now. Your shoe-in for center, Alex Forsyth, for being the center of the Denver Broncos. And then you move forward with this year. It's just like with as little of that they were able to have in terms of draft picks, like it's pretty astounding when you look at what the Broncos were able to accomplish, especially with 2024. And it's one of the reasons why, maybe because they had 5 draft picks in 2023, they had to get that quarterback at pick 12, right? So once they landed on pick 12, they had to go get that quarterback. They had to go get Bo Nix. And once they did, they really built around it.
Now, with sports nonsense's comment, Kush would be here if we didn't pay Russ all that money. Now, to be fair, we could have afforded Cushenberry. We would have had to move some other things around, but at the same time, like, it seemed like there was already a plan going into the offseason to move on from Cushenberry and go to Forsyth.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, we didn't know we were getting Bo Nix at that time, but our assumption is that Bo Nix is going to be the week 1 starter. And having a center in Alex Forsyth that has played with Bo Nix is going to be beneficial.
Yeah. And if you're going to make arguments, Justin Simmons would be here, not Cushenberry. Justin Simmons would be here if we didn't pay Russ all that money.
My heart still hurts a little bit. So we go into that was kind of like a George Payton, we love you kind of segment, right?
Yeah. So all the George Payton haters. All the George Payton haters. Once you go listen to that monologue that we did about
Kick rocks.
Yeah.
So a couple things that came out right before we went on air. It seems like Benjamin Albright is giving us some more little nuggets about the schedule. It officially comes out tomorrow at 7 Central, 6 Mountain, 8 Eastern. I'm not even going to count that much for Pacific. I don't have that. But it looks like week 1 for the Broncos is going to be at Seattle. At least that's let's call it a rumor that we're the scuttlebutt that we're hearing is that it's going to be the Broncos' first game is on the road at Seattle. And then week 2 is at home against Pittsburgh. And then we heard week 4 is at the Jets. Have we heard anything else?
I am looking right now.
Wouldn't it be something if week 1 at Seattle, we ended up either having a 4th and 5 or a field goal to win for about 66 yards? What do you think Sean Payton would do?
Right.
Just curious.
I will say this.
All right, that's all we have so far.
Okay. I will say this. Gage, you were saying that you heard that we had like 2 or 3 primetime games. Or was that game? It was one.
Yes. So it was. I can't remember exactly what Twitter account I saw it from, but it looked like a reliable one. That was Browns, and then Saints primetime. So 2 primetime games for the Broncos. I don't know what primetime games they are, but the scuttlebutt is Browns and Saints will be the Broncos' 2 primetime games that they get scheduled to initially.
So
I saw that one. It was a Twitter handle, NFL schedule link 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
So my thing is, if you don't have the Broncos and the Steelers in a primetime game, you're missing out. Like, I don't know why you wouldn't put that game as a primetime game. Like, Wilson and the Broncos were all over the news all offseason because of the cap hit we took letting him go. Why would you not have him in primetime?
Smells like week 2 Monday Night Football to me.
Oh, wouldn't that be amazing?
That would be nice.
Except week 2 is going to be Week 2 is good. Oh, that's right. Yeah, you're right. Week 2 is opening night. It's got to be Monday night.
Yeah.
Oh.
I think
all the wind gone.
Come on, Jeff.
I think I said
Heavy
3.
downer.
I think
He's not wrong, but like,
I think I said 3 is probably going to be the primetime games. I think they'll end up with 3. Just because, like, I think the other thing is there's obviously the Thursday night game, right? They always have a Thursday night game, and it's always seems to be against a divisional opponent. So you can kind of lump that into being a primetime game. There's just a few things that I mean, Gage and I didn't get a chance to talk about, like, as far as the schedule last week when we did the games, but like as far as once we touched a little bit on it before we went live, I want to play the Chiefs like roughly exactly the same way we did last year. I want to play them rather close together, or
like 2 or 3 weeks apart,
or as Gage recommended, we actually play them at home at the end of the year, not Arrowhead at the end of the year. And also, can we please not have a Christmas game? Please. Please.
Not our forte, for sure.
It's time to eat. I don't want to watch football and stream and stuff my face.
Yeah. So we can't forget, as long as we're talking about the schedule release, is our rival Chiefs have an incredible start to the season. They play the Ravens and the Bengals weeks 1 and 2. That is a tough opening. I mean, they could be 1-1, 0-2 very easily there.
Yeah, and what was this? It's exactly what happened last year, right? Had the Broncos taken care of business, all in all, they probably would have been leading division because of the fact that the Chiefs, had that rough beginning. And so it's kind of interesting. Maybe it's all kind of falling into place that it could be happening again.
You guys aren't complaining about the 4 great years with Manning. Why would we? It's Peyton Manning.
Why would we?
It's got a Super Bowl.
Seriously.
No, and we get it. We like Elway had obviously some good moments. I mean, he got Peyton Manning here. He single-handedly, I think, is the reason that he was here.
2014
we won a Super
free agency class.
Right. We pivoting from the best offense in NFL history and getting blown out in the Super Bowl to signing 3 massive defensive free agents all on the same day, and then winning the Super Bowl was masterful. The guy definitely started failing, drastically as things moved on toward the end of his tenure. And then when you hear this, that he essentially promised Aaron Rodgers on a silver platter if he'd bring his lackey coach in, and we did it, and it didn't happen. I mean, that's so damaging to the franchise because it was just such a slippery slope from then on. And so it's okay to appreciate his early efforts, but also be critical of what's happened since then.
Yeah, Elway the player forever. Elway the GM,
halfway.
Elway the GM pre-2017, yes, or pre-2016. Pre-2016.
Okay, so for example, right? Look at Bill Belichick. I mean, you don't really question anything he did when Tom Brady was on the team, but Tom Brady leaves, then what happens? You know what I'm saying? Like, sometimes it is about the quarterback you bring in. When you bring in a Manning, you're going to be successful. But what do you do after Manning leaves? That's what you're going to be judged on.
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned earlier, like, when some had kind of compared a little bit, Joe Sakic to John Elway, it's obvious now, like, Joe Sakic is a much better general manager than John Elway ever was in terms of how he's operating a franchise and everything. And that's all we're talking about. We're talking about John Elway and how he's ran the organization. This has nothing to do with his famous helicopters or, the throw to, Rod Smith against the Atlanta Falcons in Super Bowl 33. I mean, like,
wide open.
I mean, like, he had great plays. I mean, a lot of people feel like, and probably rightfully so, that he is the he is still the Broncos, greatest player of all time. So again, we're not taking any sort of thing away from John Elway as a player. It is just strictly him sitting behind a desk and making actual football-related decisions post Peyton Manning.
And Jeff does have good points with his last two comments here.
I do agree. Like, we don't know what the dynamics were with Elway and the trust, but at the same time, like, we're not hearing a lot of things about the trust. We're hearing things about decisions that Elway made. And again, we're not saying that, like, we hate Elway and wish he was never here. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is post Manning, it wasn't great. That's it. We're not, but there are a bunch of people bashing George Payton for his first 3 seasons, but at the same time, like, you make the Russ deal because of a decision that was made by Elway that made us have to go after Russ. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a lot of things that are going into this. It's not that we hate him, but when you're looking at, like, the history of GMs in Denver, Elway's probably not at the top.
No. Yeah, I mean, just like you were saying with Belichick, if you criticize the last 3 years of his moves, are you saying that he sucks as a coach? No. Like, you're saying that people shouldn't be immune for their entire lives because they've built up goodwill over a certain period of time. If they've made a mistake that really has hurt the team, it's okay for us to say something negative about that because it's true. Like, and as far as this other information that came out yesterday, I believe it to be true. So I'm going to go with that. And, listen, guy his numbers retired. He's in the Hall of Fame. He's the first thing you think of when you think of the Denver Broncos for the entire career. Like you said, the last few years, some really bad moves. The Paxton Lynch being one of them, trading up to get that guy because you heard the Dallas Cowboys wanted him and they end up with Dak Prescott. That's bad.
Yeah, like, perfect way to describe it. Kind of what you just said. Like, you got Manning, you won a Super Bowl, you don't get a pass for the rest.
Taking Bradley Chubb because instead of Josh Allen because you signed Case Keenum. That's bad. It just is.
And there's a lot of ways to look at it this way, but in that particular Paxton Lynch year, there's a reason possibly why maybe the Broncos were a bit desperate to get Paxton Lynch. Anybody remember that year? That was the Colin Kaepernick pay cut year. If Colin Kaepernick actually takes that pay cut, who knows? Like, that is another what if scenario for what could have been for the Broncos. If because you put Gary Kubiak in 2016 with Colin Kaepernick, I mean, who knows what that offense could have been like, especially coming after a few of the years that he had. So I wouldn't personally I don't put blame on John Elway there. I'm just saying that it's just a very interesting era to look at and possibly why the Broncos were so desperate in wanting to go after that quarterback, specifically Paxton Lynch.
Right. Let me ask you this, Gage, because you just mentioned Bradley Chubb. Again, a what-if scenario. What if the Browns had taken Bradley Chubb and he didn't fall to the Broncos? Because it seemed like that was so surprising that he ended up available to us, and that's why we snagged him in that position. What would happen if the Browns had taken Bradley Chubb at that draft?
I think that Josh Allen probably would have been a Denver Bronco, or Buffalo would have traded up with Denver to come get him. It all depended on how much Denver really loved Josh Allen. Clearly, they loved Bradley Chubb more, and that still hurts.
So, from what I was told, and this was in that 2018 year, the Broncos actually had a trade in place. They had a trade in place with Buffalo. To move back if Bradley Chubb was taken. So they would have taken that trade back with Buffalo, and who knows who they would have taken. I think I actually had this conversation with Mario like a couple maybe a month ago, but he and I were talking about like who could they have possibly targeted in that draft, right? I mean, you had Vita Vea going in roughly the top 15. You had Derwin James going into the, roughly into that scenario. So I think there was a tackle too that was probably within there, but I felt like maybe with where the Broncos were, they probably wanted maybe a defensive player, maybe, right? So maybe if you look at it a little bit, maybe they could have taken a Vita Vea, maybe even a Derwin James, just the safety room that could have been with even Justin Simmons and Derwin James would have just been. Whew.
Maybe it was a Josh Rosen or a Lamar Jackson.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and this is the other thing with those what ifs. Like, let's say Denver does get Josh Allen, right? You pair him with who? Fangio and Shermer at that point?
It was at that point it was Vance Joseph on the hot seat. They probably Vic Fangio probably would have never gotten hired if Josh Allen were a Denver Bronco.
Okay.
Yeah. And let's just keep it a buck. Broncos country would not have been patient with Josh Allen.
No, like if we drafted Josh Allen we have now probably isn't the thing if he doesn't go to Buffalo.
He would have been Mac Jones.
Yeah.
Maybe. Hello? Maybe.
Operator.
Now, I do kind of want to spin back a little bit to Elway just as like a closing thought. I do think that Elway was GM for the Broncos for so long because of what he had done in Denver as a player and because of how beloved he was by Bolin, right? Like, what other GM do you know of that would have missed that many times on a quarterback, that many times on a head coach, and still been the GM until he resigned?
Yeah. I think the other point of that too is you also got to look at the health of Pat. And given where things were trending with the trust and everything, like I think the way that things were trending with that trust was also another window for John and Joe Ellis, I should say, to still stick with the team and be around the team, because the trust hadn't been figured out yet, and or necessarily resolved. So that was just another year, an extra couple of years, and everything with John.
John was there so long that people still thought he was the GM 3 years after he was gone.
Right.
All right. Anything else you guys want to bring up? Anything else that we need to talk about?
No, congrats to Jeff Bryan though. He got his season tickets after 20 years today. So that's very exciting for him. So
and whoever said I love you too. It was, but love you back. All right. So with that is going to be it for this show. It's been, there was a lot of stuff that came out over this last week. So it was fun to have a good full show of information. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more to talk about. Make sure that you tune in and listen to every other show that's on the network. Cam's got Melee tomorrow right after the schedule release. So make sure you check that out. It's going to be fun. And the best way to support MHRT Network and the shows on it, as well as Broncos Syndicate with Gage Madrid, is to hit that subscribe button, hit that thumbs up. It's absolutely free. Doesn't cost you anything. Takes about a millisecond. So please make sure you do that. We love you guys. We love Broncos country. I love whoever said I love you on the show. I love you too. And we will see you guys later. Peace out.
Fast lane when I pass in the street. Bag of money in the passenger seat. Simcoe's been asking for me on the road from the west to the east. Way up, I might never come down, cause the coast's racking up.